The night of June 13, 2021 in Santiago, the capital of Chile, was unusually quiet. The city streets, typically lively even at late hours, seemed empty. Only occasional cars disturbed the peace, their headlights momentarily illuminating dark alleys before disappearing around corners. There was tension in the air. The recent murder of a young girl had shaken the city, and the police were actively searching for the perpetrator. Among those awake that night was 25-year-old Valeria Vivanco, an assistant inspector at the Metropolitan Homicide Investigation Bureau. She was preparing for her next shift, unaware that this night would become horrific for her. Valeria Vivanco was born on May 29, 1996, in Chile. She was the third child in the family of Miguel and Jacqueline Vivanco, where older children Daniela and Michelangelo were already growing up. The family lived modestly but decently. Her father worked for a transport company, providing the main income, while her mother took care of the household and raised the children. From early childhood, Valeria stood out among her peers. She grew up as a brave girl, always ready to help others. These character traits, which would later become defining in her professional life, manifested in everyday situations, whether it was protecting the weak at school or helping neighbors. In 2014, the Vivanco family went through a difficult period. Valeria's parents divorced. Despite the breakdown of the marriage, both parents maintained warm relationships with their children. They developed especially close relationships with their youngest daughter. Valeria became a kind of bridge between the separated parts of the family, maintaining connections between all its members. It was during this period that Valeria's desire to dedicate her life to serving the law and helping people finally took shape. Her determination and natural inclination towards justice became the foundation for choosing her future profession. After graduating from high school, Valeria Vivanco took a decisive step towards realizing her dream. She entered the Chilean Investigative Academy. This decision was a natural continuation of her pursuit of justice and desire to protect people. Studying at the academy proved to be a challenging test. Valeria faced strict discipline, intense physical training, and complex theoretical courses. However, her determination and natural abilities helped her not only to withstand this pressure but also to stand out among her classmates. Teachers quickly noticed the potential of the young student. Her analytical skills, attention to detail, and ability to work in a team made her one of the most promising cadets. Valeria showed a particular interest in criminology and forensic science, often staying after classes for additional research. In 2016, Valeria successfully graduated from the academy with honors. Her achievements did not go unnoticed, and soon she received an offer to join the prestigious Metropolitan Homicide Investigation Bureau. In 2017, with excellent theoretical training behind her, Valeria Vivanco began her professional career at the Metropolitan Homicide Investigation Bureau. The first months of work became a real test for her, as reality turned out to be much more complex than training cases. Despite initial difficulties, Valeria quickly adapted to the new environment. Her colleagues noted her tireless work ethic and willingness to take on the most challenging cases. She never refused night shifts or working on weekends, understanding that crime doesn't have a schedule. The first successes didn't take long to come. Valeria participated in solving several complex cases, demonstrating an extraordinary approach to analyzing evidence and working with witnesses. Her ability to establish trusting relationships with victims and their families became an important asset for the Bureau. The department leadership quickly noticed the potential of the young detective. Valeria began to be involved in more responsible tasks, entrusting her with key aspects of investigations. Her dedication to work and professionalism earned respect not only from colleagues but also from representatives of other law enforcement agencies. With each passing year, Valeria Vivanco's professional reputation grew stronger. Her dedication to work and impressive results did not go unnoticed. In 2020, she received her first significant award for successfully preventing a jewelry store robbery on July 21st. This operation became exemplary. Valeria not only prevented the crime but also managed to neutralize two dangerous criminals without casualties among the civilian population. Soon after, Valeria was sent on a diplomatic mission to Madrid. There, she demonstrated her skills in international cooperation, supporting the logistics of an important vote that became the basis for constitutional operations in Chile. This mission significantly expanded her professional experience and strengthened her position in law enforcement. By 2021, Valeria had already reached the rank of assistant inspector. This appointment was a recognition of her professional growth and abilities. At 25, she became one of the youngest employees to reach such a level in the Metropolitan Homicide Investigation Bureau. The night of June 13, 2021 began for Valeria Vivanco as a regular shift. At 4 o'clock in the morning, a special operation was conducted in the city of Santo Tomás de la Pintana to check all incoming and outgoing transport. The reason for these measures was the recent murder of a 20-year-old girl nearby. Valeria was part of a group that also included Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gallardo Araya, Assistant Inspector Maria Ura, and Detective Leonel Alejandro Contreras Canales. Their task was to identify and detain a suspect who, according to information, could be traveling in a Kia vehicle. When the suspicious car came into view, Felipe Araya skillfully blocked its path with a patrol car. Valeria and Leonel got out of the car with their weapons ready to use. Suddenly, a shot rang out and Valeria fell to the ground, having received a gunshot wound. Everything happened in front of many witnesses. Colleagues immediately rushed to help Valeria, providing first aid. She was urgently taken to Padre Hurtado Hospital, where doctors fought for her life. Despite all the efforts of the medical staff, Valeria died 2 hours later. This tragedy became a shock not only for Valeria's family and colleagues but for the entire Chilean society. The death of a young, promising police officer in the line of duty caused a wave of indignation and demands for justice. The news of Valeria Vivanco's death quickly spread throughout Chile, causing shock and outrage in society. The media immediately picked up this story, interrupting regular broadcasts for emergency reports. The street where the tragedy occurred quickly filled with journalists, police officers, and concerned citizens. The National Chief of Police for Combating Theft and Crime Hotspots, Jorge Sanchez, made an official statement on television. He reported that Vivanco was shot by criminals trying to escape from the crime scene. Sanchez also announced the successful detention of two suspects, 19-year-old Miguel Calabrano and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not disclosed due to being a minor. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera also made a statement, expressing deep sorrow over the death of the young police officer. He called Valeria a brave girl who was doing her duty and promised that the authorities would do everything possible to establish justice. The public reacted with mass demonstrations and demands to enhance the safety of police officers. Social networks were flooded with messages of condolence and calls for severe punishment of the guilty. The farewell ceremony for Valeria Vivanco took place in the department where she worked. The event gathered hundreds of people, relatives, colleagues, friends, and ordinary citizens who came to pay their respects to the deceased. The farewell ceremony was held with all the honors due to a police officer who died in the line of duty. Valeria's colleagues, including Leonel Canales, carried her coffin from the office to the hearse and then to the cemetery. The procession moved through the city streets, where people applauded, paying their last respects to the heroine. High-ranking officials were present at the ceremony: Interior Minister Rodrigo Delgado, his deputy Juan Francisco Gali, head of the Homicide Investigation Department Hector Espinoza, and the country's president. A 3-day mourning period was declared in the department where Vivanco worked and in the academy where she studied. Hector Espinoza presented Valeria's parents with the Chilean flag, which they later hung at home next to a photograph of their deceased daughter. Speeches by colleagues and leadership emphasized Valeria's professionalism and dedication to her work. This farewell became not only a personal tragedy for the Vivanco family, but also a symbol of national loss, which further emphasized the importance of investigating the circumstances of her death. Immediately after the tragedy, the official version of events was clear: Valeria Vivanco was shot by criminals during an escape attempt. The authorities quickly announced the detention of two suspects: 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Calabrano and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not disclosed due to being a minor. In June 2021, the first court hearing in the case took place. During it, Valeria's colleagues reported that on the night of the tragedy, they were conducting a covert operation, which is why Vivanco was not wearing a bulletproof vest and was traveling in a car without police logos. According to the prosecution's version, the suspects, trying to escape, intentionally opened fire on Vivanco. The court ordered both suspects to be taken into custody for 6 months, the estimated time for conducting the investigation. For the police at that moment, everything seemed obvious: the suspects were detained, the case could be considered almost closed. However, this version of events soon began to raise doubts. Relatives of the detainees stated that their children only confessed to accidentally hitting Vivanco with a car but did not shoot her. The mother of one of the suspects even filed a statement with the prosecutor's office, asserting her son's innocence and demanding the establishment of the truth. Despite the official version of events, Valeria Vivanco's family began to feel that something was wrong. Their suspicions intensified when they learned about some inconsistencies in the investigation. Valeria's sister, Daniela, in one of the interviews, stated that she had audio recordings from her sister's phone, which recorded that fatal operation. According to her, the recordings clearly heard Valeria's conversation only with Leonel Canales, which did not correspond to the official version of events. The Vivanco family, no longer trusting the official investigation, decided to conduct their own investigation. Valeria's older brother, Michelangelo, and sister Daniela began carefully studying the case materials, looking for new evidence. They even visited the city of Santo Tomas, where the tragedy occurred, trying to find surveillance cameras that could have recorded the real events of that night. The family's lawyer, Alfredo Morgado, drew attention to contradictions in witness testimonies and the strange behavior of some participants in the reconstruction of events. He emphasized that all detectives claimed they did not use weapons that night, although department head Sergio Munoz said the opposite. These discrepancies and inconsistencies only strengthened the determination of the Vivanco family to get to the truth, despite the official position of the authorities. In August 2021, the case took an unexpected turn. 3 investigators who participated in the investigation were suddenly fired due to possible involvement in the death of their colleague. On August 2nd, Valeria's parents were invited to the district prosecutor's office, where Inspector Juan Carlos Carrasco, on behalf of the police, offered them deep apologies. It turned out that their daughter died from a bullet from the gun of one of her colleagues. This news caused shock and outrage not only in the Vivanco family but in the entire society. Especially shocked was Juan Guillermo Vivanco, Miguel's son from his second marriage, who studied at the same academy as Valeria, inspired by her achievements. Suddenly it turned out that the department where he dreamed of working was involved in his sister's death. On August 4th, representatives of the Southern Prosecutor's Office released the results of an examination conducted by the Homicide Investigation Unit itself. It turned out that the bullet that killed Valeria Vivanco had a 9mm caliber, which is used in service weapons. This meant that the 3 detectives who accompanied Valeria that night could be involved in her death. During the investigation conducted by the prosecutor's office, serious violations and attempts to conceal evidence were revealed. It turned out that approximately 2 to 3 hours after Valeria's death, the police confirmed the detention of suspects. However, according to the prosecutor's office, both criminals surrendered themselves the next day, and only then was their detention officially registered. On July 29, 2021, the prosecutor received a report from the forensic laboratory, which had been kept in the investigation bureau for more than a month. It indicated the gun and bullet that killed Valeria Vivenko. The weapon belonged to her colleagues on the operation. It turned out that on June 17, Bureau experts conducted a ballistic check of the 3 detectives who were with Valeria at the moment of the tragedy and the 2 detained teenagers. Chief expert Jose Garrotti indicated in the report that traces of gunpowder were found on Leonel Canales' hands. This information reached the leadership of the unit but somehow was not used in the investigation. In addition, the forensic service report contained incorrect data regarding the trajectory of the fatal bullet. According to the document, the bullet entered the girl's abdomen from the front, but the ballistic study conducted by the Investigation Bureau showed that the fatal shot was made to the back. Experts also found a bullet with particles of Vivenko's blood at the scene of the tragedy. These facts caused outrage from the prosecutor's office and raised questions about possible corruption and attempts to conceal the truth in police ranks. Leonel Alejandro Contreras Canales, a 21-year-old police officer who worked with Valeria Vivenko, unexpectedly found himself at the center of the investigation. Before the tragedy, he was considered a promising young employee who had joined the unit only a few months ago. Suspicions about Canales intensified after the examination revealed traces of gunpowder on his hands. Moreover, his position at the moment of the shot, according to eyewitness testimonies, coincided with the trajectory of the bullet that hit Valeria. In November 2021, Leonel Canales was arrested on a prosecutor's warrant and taken to a pretrial detention center. At the first control hearing, the prosecutor's office officially charged him with manslaughter and demanded pretrial detention. Canales denied his guilt. He claimed that the traces of gunpowder on his hands appeared when he tried to stop the bleeding, providing first aid to Valeria. He also insisted that after the operation, he returned his service pistol with the same number of cartridges as before it. The trial of Leonel Canales began in March 2023. The prosecutor's office was confident in his guilt and intended to seek imprisonment for at least 15 years. The Vivenko family supported this position. The prosecution presented various reports and examinations which, in their opinion, confirmed that it was Canales who fired the fatal shot. They emphasized the lack of rational motives for using a weapon in that situation. Canales' defense, led by lawyer Eva Guerrero, based their strategy on the claim that their client did not see who shot Valeria and even thought he was wounded himself. They insisted that Canales could not have fired the shot due to his position and the trajectory of the bullet that hit Valeria. Additionally, the defense put forward a version about the possible involvement of Felipe Araya, the driver of the patrol car, in the shooting. They claimed that Araya could have accidentally fired his pistol without leaving the driver's seat. The court carefully studied the arguments of both sides, as well as additional evidence presented by the Vivenko family as a result of their private investigation. In May 2023, violating the ban on communication with the press, Leonel Canales invited journalists to the pretrial detention center. This interview came as a surprise to all parties in the process. During the conversation, Canales publicly declared his innocence. He claimed that Valeria was killed by Felipe Araya with a shot to the back, which allowed the real criminals to escape. According to Canales, the subsequent investigation was conducted with numerous errors, which led to his unjust accusation. This interview caused mixed reactions. The prosecutor's office regarded it as an attempt to create additional hype around the case. The Vivenko family was outraged that Canales was allowed to speak publicly. The court reprimanded Canales for violating the ban on communication with journalists. Canales' statement about Felipe Araya's possible involvement in Valeria's death forced the investigation to once again check all versions of events. Canales' lawyers presented additional evidence in favor of this theory. They claimed that Araya, known among colleagues by the nickname Crazy Shooter due to his tendency to use weapons unreasonably, could have accidentally fired while behind the wheel of the patrol car. In their opinion, the identical nature of Canales and Araya's pistols could have led to confusion during the investigation. The defense also drew attention to the fact that Araya thoroughly washed his hands before the analysis for traces of gunpowder, and his testimony about the events of that night was contradictory and changed over time. However, the prosecutor's office considered this version weak. They insisted that all pistols of the operation participants were thoroughly checked, and the evidence pointed to Canales as the shooter. The Vivanco family, conducting their own investigation, found some evidence that could confirm the version about Araya's involvement. They provided the court with reports from the Carabineros, which, in their opinion, confirmed this theory. These new versions and evidence forced the court to order additional examinations and witness interrogations, which significantly delayed the process and complicated the establishment of the truth. The judicial process in the Valeria Vivanco case continued until November 2023. During this time, the court carefully examined all presented evidence, heard witnesses, and experts. On November 17, the court announced its decision. Leonel Canales was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. This decision was a compromise between the positions of the prosecution and the defense. The court took into account that Canales did not intend to kill his colleague, but his actions led to the tragic death of Valeria Vivanco. On November 29, 2023, the sentence was announced. Leonel Canales received 12 years in prison. The prosecution insisted on 15 years, while the defense asked for 10 years. The judge explained that in determining the sentence, 2 years that Canales spent in custody during the investigation were taken into account. In addition, Canales was prohibited from holding any public positions after release. The Valeria Vivanco case had a significant impact on the law enforcement system in Chile. It revealed serious problems with corruption and concealment of information in the police. As a result of the investigation, 16 employees of the Investigation Bureau were fired, including high-ranking officers. Among them was the director of the Homicide Investigation Department, Jorge Marquez, who was accused of administrative violations. This case led to a review of internal investigation procedures in the police. New protocols were implemented to ensure greater transparency and accountability during investigations of incidents involving police officers. In addition, control over the use of service weapons was strengthened, and mandatory wearing of body cameras was introduced for employees participating in special operations. This tragedy also forced a review of the training system for young police officers, placing greater emphasis on ethical aspects of work and the importance of following the law even in difficult situations. The tragic death of Valeria Vivanco did not remain just a sad page in the history of the Chilean police. Her short but bright life became a symbol of dedication to duty and professionalism for many young officers. A square in the city was named in honor of Valeria. Every year on the day of her death, a commemoration ceremony is held there, during which people bring flowers and light candles. This tradition has become not only a tribute to Valeria's memory but also a reminder of the importance and danger of law enforcement work. A memorial plaque with her portrait was installed at the police academy where Valeria studied. The story of her life and service became part of the training course for future officers, as an example of professional ethics and selflessness. The Vivanco family, despite the pain of loss, actively participated in preserving Valeria's memory. They established a charitable foundation in her name, which provides support to families of police officers who died in the line of duty. Despite the completion of the trial and the sentencing, Valeria Vivanco's family did not feel that justice had been fully restored. They remained dissatisfied with the verdict, considering it too lenient for the severity of the crime. Valeria's parents publicly expressed their disappointment that Leonel Canales, by their calculations, could be released in just 9 to 10 years thanks to the early release system. They considered this unfair, given that their daughter lost her life. The Vivanco family did not stop their private investigation. They continued to search for new evidence that could shed light on some still unclear aspects of the case. In particular, they were interested in the motives for the crime and the possible involvement of other persons in concealing evidence. The family's lawyer announced their intention to appeal the verdict, insisting on a more severe punishment for Canales and continuing the investigation into the possible involvement of other officers in the tragedy. This tireless struggle of the Vivanco family to establish the full truth became a symbol of how personal tragedy can turn into a fight for systemic changes in law enforcement and society as a whole. The Valeria Vivanco case became a catalyst for significant changes in Chilean society, especially in the context of perception of law enforcement work and trust in them. First of all, this tragedy sparked a wide discussion about police transparency and accountability. The public demanded greater access to information about internal investigations and clearer mechanisms for controlling law enforcement activities. In response to these demands, the Chilean government initiated a series of reforms. An independent commission was created to oversee police activities, which included representatives of the public and human rights experts. This commission was given the authority to conduct its own investigations in cases of abuse by police officers. In addition, psychological support programs for law enforcement officers were strengthened. This decision was made taking into account the stressful nature of their work and the need to prevent emotional burnout, which can lead to mistakes and misconduct. The changes also affected the education system. Special lessons were introduced in schools dedicated to the role of police in society and the importance of mutual respect between citizens and law enforcement officers. The media also changed their approach to covering such incidents. Journalists began to pay more attention to investigating facts and avoiding sensationalism when covering events related to police work. Overall, the tragedy of Valeria Vivanco became a turning point in the relationship between society and law enforcement in Chile, encouraging greater openness, dialogue, and mutual responsibility. In a small square in Santiago, named after Valeria Vivanco, it's always quiet. Only the rustle of leaves and the muffled steps of passers-by disturb the peace of this place. In the center of the square stands a modest monument, a bronze figure of a young woman in police uniform, looking into the distance, as if guarding the peace of the city even after death. Every day, people come to the monument: police colleagues, academy students, ordinary citizens. They bring flowers, light candles, some just stand silently, paying tribute to Valeria's memory. This square has become not only a place of memory but also a symbol of the changes that have taken place in Chilean society after the tragedy. It reminds of the price of serving the law and the importance of justice. The story of Valeria Vivanco continues to live in people's hearts, inspiring new generations to honesty, courage, and dedication to their cause. Her short life left a deep mark, changing not only the law enforcement system but also the consciousness of an entire society. On the plaque near the monument are engraved words that best describe Valeria's life path: she lived to serve and died protecting others. These words have become not just an epitaph, but a call to all who dedicate their lives to serving society.
The story of Celeste Mano is a tragic example of how stalking can turn a person's life into a nightmare and lead to fatal consequences. This case, which shook Australia in 2020, highlighted serious flaws in the system for protecting victims of stalking and prompted a rethinking of approaches to combating this crime. Let's examine in detail the events that led to the tragic death of 23-year-old Celeste and the consequences this case had for Australian society and legislation. Celeste Mano was born on November 22, 1996 in Italy. She was the middle child in the family, having an older stepbrother, Jaden, and a younger brother, Alessandro. When Celeste was still young, her family moved to Melbourne, Australia, seeking better opportunities and a new life. Growing up in Melbourne, Celeste proved to be a bright and sociable girl. In school, she was a cheerleader, demonstrating her love for dance and teamwork. Her smile, according to those close to her, could light up any room, and her laughter was contagious. After finishing high school, Celeste enrolled at RMIT University in 2015, where she studied criminology and psychology. Her choice of education reflected a deep interest in understanding human behavior and a desire to help others. Celeste dreamed of becoming a psychologist, aspiring to unravel the complex mysteries of the human mind and use this knowledge for the benefit of society. Throughout her life, Celeste maintained close relationships with her family, especially with her mother, Aggie. Their bond was incredibly strong, and Celeste always shared her thoughts, dreams, and problems with her mother. Even as an adult, Celeste kept a touching tradition. Every night before bed, her mother would come to her room to wish her good night and discuss the events of the day. After graduating from university in 2019, Celeste got a job at the Serco call center in Mill Park, a suburb of Melbourne. This job became not just her first step in her career, but also an opportunity to apply her knowledge of psychology in practice, communicating with different people and solving their problems. From the very beginning, Celeste proved herself to be a talented and dedicated employee. Her natural kindness, communication skills, and intelligence did not go unnoticed. Management quickly appreciated her abilities, and soon Celeste received a promotion, becoming a team leader. In her new position, Celeste continued to demonstrate her leadership qualities and ability to work with people. She created a positive atmosphere in the team, helped colleagues develop and effectively solve work tasks. Her professionalism and humanity earned respect from both subordinates and management. It was during this period that Celeste met many of her colleagues, among whom was Louis Seiko. At that time, nothing foreshadowed the tragedy that would unfold in the future. Seiko was one of many employees, and Celeste, as a team leader, maintained purely professional relationships with him. Alongside her career development, Celeste didn't forget about her personal life. At work, she met Chris Ridsdale, whom she later started dating. Their relationship developed gradually, and Chris saw in Celeste not only a beautiful girl but also a smart, purposeful person with a big heart. In June 2019, an event occurred at the Serco call center that would later prove to be a turning point in Celeste Manos' life. Louis Seiko, a 35-year-old company employee, received a notice of dismissal due to productivity issues. As a team leader, Celeste was assigned to escort Seiko from the office on his last day of work. This moment, which should have been a simple formality, turned into the beginning of a dangerous obsession. When Celeste led Seiko to the exit, showing compassion and professional courtesy, she shook his hand and wished him success in the future. However, Seiko's reaction was unexpected and unacceptable. He suddenly pulled Celeste towards him and kissed her on the cheek. This act shocked Celeste, leaving her confused and uncomfortable. She quickly stepped back, trying to maintain professionalism in this awkward situation. That same evening, returning home, Celeste shared this incident with her mother Aggie, expressing her surprise and discomfort at Seiko's behavior. Aggie, trying to calm her daughter, suggested that perhaps Seiko just had an innocent crush on Celeste, and that this incident shouldn't be taken too seriously. However, this maternal advice, dictated by a desire to reduce her daughter's anxiety, would later prove to be a fatally underestimated threat. About a week after Seiko's dismissal, he took the first step that would later grow into large-scale stalking. He contacted Celeste through Instagram, sending her a message that immediately caused her concern. In his message, Seiko declared his strong feelings for Celeste, claiming that he couldn't eat, sleep, or function normally at his new job without her. At first, Celeste tried to respond to these messages delicately. She politely thanked Seiko for his kind words, but made it clear that her feelings for him were purely professional, and she wasn't interested in a romantic relationship. Celeste also wished him all the best for the future, hoping this would put an end to the unwanted communication. However, Celeste's rejection only intensified Seiko's obsession. He began creating numerous fake Instagram accounts to continue contacting her after she blocked his previous profiles. The messages became more frequent and intrusive, moving from romantic confessions to explicit sexual fantasies. Celeste tried to ignore these messages, blocking each new Seiko account. However, his persistence knew no bounds. Sometimes new profiles would appear within minutes of blocking the previous ones. This situation began to seriously affect Celeste's emotional state, causing her stress and insomnia. After 6 months of continuous stalking, Celeste decided she could no longer handle the situation alone. She shared her problems with her mother Aggie and close friends, revealing the extent of Seiko's stalking. Her circle was shocked by the intensity and persistence of Seiko's actions. Aggie, concerned for her daughter's safety, insisted that Celeste go to the police. Despite her doubts, Celeste agreed, and they visited the local police station together. Celeste detailed the situation, showing numerous messages from Seiko and explaining how his actions were affecting her daily life. However, the police response was disappointing. The officer who received them stated that technically Seiko hadn't committed any crime. He advised Celeste to just ignore the messages or delete her social media accounts altogether. The policeman didn't even record Seiko's name or the details of Celeste's complaint. This refusal of help deeply upset Celeste and Aggie. They left the police station feeling helpless and disappointed in the system that should have protected them. The following months became a real ordeal for Celeste. Seiko's stalking didn't stop, but instead became more intense. His messages took on an increasingly threatening nature, often containing sexual fantasies and hints of physical violence. Celeste's emotional state began to deteriorate. She suffered from constant stress, anxiety, and insomnia. Fear of Seiko began to affect her daily life. Celeste became more vigilant, often looking over her shoulder when leaving home or returning from work. Despite this, Celeste tried to maintain a normal rhythm of life. She continued to work, maintain relationships with friends and family. However, her loved ones noticed changes in her behavior. She became less open, often seeming distant and worried. At work, Celeste tried to focus on her duties, but the constant fear that Seiko might appear in the office affected her productivity. She began to avoid social events and limited her activity on social media, trying to minimize chances of contact with Seiko. Despite all these difficulties, Celeste didn't give up. She sought support from her loved ones, especially her mother and her boyfriend Chris Ridsdale, who did everything possible to help her cope with the situation. Despite the constant pressure from Seiko, Celeste's personal life began to take positive turns. Her relationship with colleague Chris Ridsdale, which started as a friendship, gradually grew into a romantic one. Chris proved to be a reliable support for Celeste during this difficult period. Chris, understanding Celeste's situation, showed patience and support. He didn't pressure her, giving her the time and space needed to cope with the emotional burden of stalking. His presence in Celeste's life became a source of stability and comfort. The couple began spending more time together, enjoying simple pleasures of life. They went for walks, visited cafes and restaurants, trying to create islands of normalcy amidst the chaos caused by Seiko's actions. For Celeste, this relationship became a ray of hope. She began to feel that she might be able to regain control of her life. Chris' presence gave her a sense of security and normality that she so desperately needed. However, despite these positive changes, Seiko's shadow still loomed over Celeste's life. She couldn't fully relax and enjoy her new relationship, constantly fearing that Seiko might somehow find out about Chris and direct his aggression towards him. About a year after the stalking began, the situation sharply escalated. Seiko seemed to have become even more aggressive and persistent in his actions. His messages took on a more threatening nature, often containing undisguised threats. One day, Celeste noticed Seiko's car parked near her workplace. This discovery shocked her, as it meant that Seiko was not limited to virtual stalking, but was physically following her. The situation worsened when Celeste discovered that Seiko had somehow found out her home address. She began to notice his car in her neighborhood, causing her constant feelings of fear and panic. These events seriously affected Celeste's psychological state. She began to suffer from panic attacks, was afraid to leave the house alone, and constantly checked if doors and windows were locked. Her work and personal life began to suffer due to constant stress and anxiety. Aggie, Celeste's mother, was deeply concerned about her daughter's condition. She saw how the once cheerful and energetic Celeste was turning into a shadow of herself. Chris also felt helpless, not knowing how to protect his loved one from this invisible but constant threat. It became obvious that the situation had gotten out of control and required immediate action. Celeste and her loved ones realized that they needed to seek help from the authorities again, despite their previous negative experience. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Celeste and Aggie decided to approach the police again. This time they were better prepared, having detailed records of all incidents, screenshots of messages, and information about Seiko's appearances near Celeste's home and workplace. At the police station, they were met by a different officer who was more attentive to their problem. He listened carefully to Celeste, reviewed the provided evidence, and acknowledged that the situation was indeed serious and required intervention. The officer explained that while individual actions of Seiko might not fall under the definition of a criminal offense, their totality constituted a pattern of systematic stalking. He advised Celeste to apply for a restraining order against Seiko. The process of obtaining a restraining order proved to be quite complex and lengthy. Celeste had to describe in detail all instances of stalking, provide evidence, and explain why she felt threatened for her safety. This was an emotionally exhausting experience for her, but the support of her mother and Chris helped her get through it. After reviewing the case, the court issued a restraining order that prohibited Seiko from contacting Celeste in any way, approaching her home, or workplace. This decision brought Celeste some relief, although she understood that it was just a piece of paper that couldn't physically stop Seiko. The first month after receiving the restraining order brought Celeste long-awaited relief. Seiko seemed to have disappeared from her life. The messages stopped. His car no longer appeared near her home or work. Celeste gradually began to return to normal life. She started sleeping peacefully again. Her productivity at work improved. She even began spending more time with friends and family, rebuilding social connections that had suffered due to the stress of stalking. Her relationship with Chris also strengthened. They began making plans for the future, dreaming of a life together. Celeste even started considering moving and changing jobs to finally leave the past behind. Aggie happily observed her daughter returning to her former cheerful state. She hoped that the worst was behind them and that Seiko had finally understood that he should leave Celeste alone. However, despite the positive changes, Celeste couldn't completely relax. She still remained cautious, avoided posting information about her whereabouts on social media, and was vigilant when leaving the house. Deep inside, she felt that this silence might be deceptive. On November 14, 2020, just 2 days before the tragic events, Celeste and Chris decided to spend the day together, enjoying the gradual easing of COVID-19-related quarantine restrictions. They chose a rooftop restaurant in downtown Melbourne for their date, which offered a beautiful view of the city. The day turned out to be sunny and warm, perfect for outdoor relaxation. Celeste and Chris spent several hours at the restaurant, talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. They discussed their plans for the future, dreamed about traveling after the pandemic ended. During the date, the couple took several photos, including one that would later become fatal. In this picture, Celeste and Chris were embracing, their faces shining with happiness. This photo seemed particularly successful to Celeste, and she decided to publish it on Instagram to officially announce her relationship with Chris. Returning home, Celeste shared her impressions of the wonderful day with her mother. She also discussed with Aggie her intention to post the photo on social media. Aggie, seeing her daughter's happiness, supported her decision, believing that the threat from Seiko had passed. On November 15th, Celeste posted the photo on Instagram, adding a romantic caption to it. She received many positive comments from friends and relatives who were happy for her. The rest of the day Celeste spent at home, watching a movie and planning with her mother the celebration of her upcoming 24th birthday. No one could have predicted that this post would become the catalyst for the tragic events that would unfold the next day. The evening of November 15th, 2020, began as usual. Celeste and Aggie followed their usual evening routine. They had dinner together, discussing the events of the day and plans for the next week. Around 10 p.m., Aggie went to Celeste's room to wish her good night. "Should I turn off the light or leave it on?" Aggie asked, as always. "Leave it. I'll turn it off myself in a minute," Celeste replied. "Okay, love you," said Aggie. "I love you more." "Good night," were the last words Aggie heard from her daughter. At approximately 4:10 a.m. on November 16th, Aggie woke up to a sound that resembled breaking glass. She instantly realized that the sound was coming from Celeste's room. Overcome with horror, Aggie rushed to her daughter's room. What she saw forever changed her life. Celeste was lying on the bed, motionless and covered in blood. The bedroom window was broken and the floor was strewn with shards of glass. Aggie rushed to her daughter, begging her to open her eyes to say something, but Celeste didn't respond. Aggie immediately called emergency services, screaming the address into the phone and begging them to come as quickly as possible. She tried to provide first aid to her daughter, but the wounds were too serious. When paramedics arrived, they found that Celeste was already dead. Later, the autopsy showed that she had been stabbed 23 times, one of which went straight to her heart, proving fatal. When the paramedics confirmed Celeste's death, Aggie fell into a state of shock. She couldn't believe that her daughter, whom she had talked to just a few hours ago, was no longer alive. In a moment of despair and anger, Aggie cried out, "He killed her!" drawing the attention of the police officers who had arrived at the crime scene. The police immediately began an investigation. They examined the crime scene, collecting evidence. Numerous bloody fingerprints were found on the windowsill and fence. A neighbor's surveillance camera captured a car quickly driving away from the Mono house around the time the ambulance arrived. Detectives questioned Aggie, trying to understand who she meant by he. Aggie told them about Louis Seco and his obsessive stalking of Celeste over the past year. She also informed them about the restraining order issued against Seco. Meanwhile, news of the tragedy spread quickly. Chris Ridsdale, upon receiving the terrible news, was devastated. He couldn't believe that Celeste, with whom he had spent a wonderful day just 2 days ago, was gone. The police immediately began searching for Louis Seco. However, their efforts proved unnecessary. About an hour after the murder, Seco himself appeared at the police station. He had an injured hand and immediately confessed to Celeste's murder. "She's dead. She's dead. Go see. You know what happened." "It's your fault," Seco told the officer on duty, giving him Celeste's address. He even tried to provoke the police officers to shoot him, but instead was arrested. During the search of Seco's phone, investigators discovered that he had been closely monitoring Celeste's Instagram account. Hundreds of screenshots of photos of Celeste and Chris were found on his device. A search of Seco's laptop revealed search queries about Chris, the restaurant where Celeste and Chris had their date, and most disturbingly, plans of Celeste's house. Investigators also found that 3 months before the murder, Seco had purchased a hammer and a kitchen knife at a local supermarket. These findings indicated that the murder was carefully planned, not committed in a fit of rage. Seco was charged with first-degree murder. He was taken into custody without the possibility of bail. Given the severity of the crime and the potential threat to society, the trial of Louis Seco began almost 3 years after the murder of Celeste Mano. This delay was partly caused by restrictions related to the COVID-19 pandemic, but mostly by the delaying tactics chosen by Seco and his defense. During this time, Seco repeatedly changed his position. Initially, he confessed to the murder, but later retracted his words. His lawyers tried to prove that Seco was mentally incompetent at the time of the crime. Seco underwent numerous psychiatric evaluations. One expert, Dr. Darji, claimed that Seco suffered from hallucinations and was forced to act under the influence of an imaginary creature named Isha. However, other experts concluded that Seco was fully competent and aware of his actions. The prosecution presented strong evidence against Seco. They showed the court numerous messages he had sent to Celeste, evidence of his physical stalking of her, as well as a detailed plan of her house found on his computer. Particular attention was paid to the fact that Seiko had purchased the murder weapons several months before the attack, indicating a premeditated murder. Celeste's family and friends gave emotional testimonies about the impact of Seiko's stalking on her life. Chris Ridsdale spoke about the fear and stress Celeste experienced in the last months of her life. Aggie shared painful memories of the night of the murder and recounted Celeste's numerous attempts to get help from law enforcement. Seiko, for his part, tried to convince the court that he had only inflicted 2 blows on Celeste, and the rest of the wounds were caused by broken glass. This version was quickly disproven by forensic experts. Throughout the process, Seiko showed no signs of remorse. His behavior in court was described as cold and indifferent, which further turned the jury against him. On February 29, 2024, after a lengthy trial, Louis Seiko, who was 39 years old at the time, was found guilty of murdering Celeste Mano. The judge sentenced him to 36 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. In announcing the sentence, Judge Dixon noted that while Seiko did suffer from a rare and extreme personality disorder, this did not justify his actions. The judge also emphasized the deep trauma experienced by Celeste's family due to Seiko's actions. The reaction of Celeste's family to the verdict was mixed. On one hand, they felt relief that Seiko was finally held accountable. On the other hand, they considered the punishment not severe enough, given the brutality of the crime and the fact that Seiko had deprived Celeste of her entire future life. Aggie, Celeste's mother, expressed her disappointment after the sentencing. She stated that the court had shown mercy to Seiko, although he had shown no mercy to her daughter. Aggie also emphasized that the justice system had failed Celeste when she sought help. The verdict caused wide resonance in society. Many considered it too lenient, given the nature of the crime and the prolonged stalking that preceded the murder. Others pointed to the need for reform of legislation regarding stalking and harassment. After the conclusion of the trial, Aggie Mano decided to channel her pain and anger in a constructive direction. She launched a campaign to strengthen legislation on stalking and harassment in Australia. Her goal was to prevent similar tragedies in the future and provide better protection for potential victims. Aggie began actively collaborating with experts in criminal law and psychology. She studied the laws of various countries, looking for effective models to combat stalking. Based on this research, she developed a series of proposals for changes in legislation. One of Aggie's key initiatives was the introduction of electronic monitoring for individuals who had been issued restraining orders. She believed that if Seiko had been under such surveillance after receiving the restraining order, the tragedy could have been prevented. Aggie also insisted on the need for better training of police officers to deal with cases of stalking. She argued that if the police had taken Celeste's first complaints more seriously, the situation could have been brought under control at an early stage. Her efforts caught the attention of the Victorian Law Reform Commission, which in 2021 began an investigation into stalking laws in the state. Aggie presented the commission with 45 recommendations for changes in legislation. However, despite her persistence, the process of change proved to be slow and complex. Many of her proposals were not accepted, which caused Aggie deep disappointment. Nevertheless, she didn't give up, continuing her fight for reforms. Parallel to this activity, Aggie created the Celeste Mano Memorial Foundation. The foundation's purpose was to provide support to victims of stalking and their families, as well as to fund research in the field of stalking prevention. The foundation organized educational programs for schools and universities, teaching young people to recognize signs of dangerous behavior and seek help. Training sessions were also conducted for law enforcement officers, aimed at improving their ability to respond effectively to cases of stalking. The tragic story of Celeste Mano sparked a wide discussion in Australian society about the problem of stalking and the effectiveness of the existing system for protecting victims. Experts from various fields analyzed this case, trying to understand exactly where the system failed and how to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The story of Celeste Mano became a powerful catalyst for changes in public perception of the stalking problem. It showed that even in developed countries, there are serious gaps in the system of protecting victims of stalking, and that these gaps can have fatal consequences.
Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Crime Story Diaries. Today we'll be examining a terrifying case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. This shocking story took place in April 2013 in the town of Brentwood, Tennessee, USA. Brentwood is an elite suburb located approximately 20 minutes drive from Nashville. It is one of the wealthiest communities not only in the state, but in all of America. The town is in the top 20 most affluent cities in the USA. Brentwood is renowned for its picturesque landscapes and high standard of living. It has a population of around 40,000 people. The average income of residents is much higher than the national average. Brentwood is considered one of the safest cities in America. Since its founding in 1969, there have been only 8 murders here. The crime rate in Brentwood is 74% lower than the US average. The reliability and security of life here is also evidenced by the fact that the town is partially located in Williamson County, the 16th wealthiest county in the USA. In addition to its luxurious scenery, Brentwood attracts celebrities and the wealthy with its developed infrastructure. There are over 10 parks, plenty of upscale stores and restaurants, and a world-class private golf club. And most importantly, the bustling Nashville is only a 20-minute drive away. Movie stars, musicians, and athletes often buy real estate in Brentwood. Among the famous residents are Taylor Swift, Nicole Kidman, and Keith Urban, Jack White, Mike Fisher, and Carrie Underwood. Successful business people, politicians, and top managers of large companies who have offices in the city's business district also settle here. In a word, Brentwood is the ideal place for those who want to live beautifully, safely, and at the same time, in seclusion. But despite all its elitism, status, and well-being, even Brentwood is not immune to bloody dramas and tragedies. One of the most terrible occurred in April 2013 in the mansion of the Maidens couple. The Maidens couple's mansion was located in the very heart of the so-called Governor's Club. This is a gated cottage community, one of the most expensive and prestigious areas of Brentwood. The elite neighborhood occupies an area of 600 acres around a private golf club designed by the famous golfer Arnold Palmer. Only residents and their guests can access the territory. The home of Rachel and Randy Maidens was a true embodiment of a dream, a luxurious 500-square-meter mansion worth about $1 million. It seemed like the perfect place for a happy family life and career. No one could have imagined that a bloody drama would unfold within these walls. Dr. Rachel Maidens was an extremely successful and vivid personality. This 34-year-old blonde had an attractive appearance, a sharp mind, and many talents. She was a brilliant orthodontist with her own private practice located in Brentwood's business district of Maryland Farms. Rachel sincerely adored her 2-year-old daughter, Natalie. Rachel had an elite education. She graduated from the prestigious Father Ryan Catholic School in Nashville, then the academically renowned Birmingham Southern College in Alabama. During her studies, she was a star of the tennis team, receiving the highest athletic and academic awards. She earned a bachelor's degree with magna cum laude honors in biology and psychology. She was awarded one of the most prestigious Dinaheiser scholarships. Rachel then went on to the University of Florida Dental School. Here, too, she proved herself brilliantly. She was the class president, recognized for her leadership qualities and active community work. After obtaining a Doctor of Dental Surgery degree, she completed her orthodontics residency at the Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. Despite her young age, Rachel reached incredible heights in her career. She opened her own clinic, published articles in professional journals, and was a popular speaker at conferences. The list of her achievements was impressive. At the same time, at the start of her independent life, the girl experienced a terrible family tragedy. On December 3, 2003, when Rachel was still a student, a tragedy occurred that forever changed the life of her family. The girl's father, Dr. Richard, who was a respected pharmacist, was arrested by federal agents. He was accused of selling the painkiller OxyContin to an informant from the Drug Enforcement Administration. In addition, Richard was allegedly engaged in the illegal sale of prescription drugs right out of his home. However, the case never went to trial. Just 2 days after his arrest, Rachel's father took his own life. He could not bear the burden of shame and fear of justice. But the nightmare for the Frisbee family did not end there. The Nashville police froze the bank accounts not only of Richard, but also of Rachel, her mother, and her brother. They all found themselves involved in the investigation of the head of the family's crimes. The investigation lasted for years, and as a result, Rachel and her relatives were found innocent, but they suffered financially. The girl's mother received $15,000 in compensation from the police, but this could hardly heal the emotional wounds. One can only guess what emotional scars this story left on Rachel's soul. However, the girl did not allow the family tragedy to ruin her life. She continued her studies, brilliantly graduated from university, and obtained a profession. Apparently, Rachel was deeply motivated to become the best, achieve success, and secure financial independence for herself. Perhaps a defense mechanism worked, the desire to protect herself and her future family, to no longer depend on anyone. Rachel survived the terrible loss of a loved one and nearly found herself on the verge of bankruptcy. But she managed to pull herself together and radically change her life. And she succeeded. Unfortunately, not for long. She had no idea that she had married a man who wanted her dead. Randolph Carey Maidens was born into the family of Charles and Barbara Maidens in St. Louis, Missouri. He spent most of his childhood in Georgia, where he graduated from Wheeler High School in Marietta. He then received higher education at the prestigious Georgia Tech College. At the time of his marriage to Rachel, Randy held the position of sales manager at a pharmaceutical company based in Brentwood. This biotech firm specialized primarily in oncology research. However, according to rumors, by the time of his wife's murder, Randy was no longer working there. There is no official confirmation of this information, as the company's management reacted very painfully to the actions of their employee and refused to give any comments. But this version seems plausible given Randy's strange behavior in the months leading up to the tragedy. Approximately 3 months before Rachel's murder, Randy Maidens underwent striking and alarming changes in his behavior. The man was rapidly slipping into alcoholism and likely abusing drugs as well. In January, restaurant patrons noticed Randy, wildly drunk, bursting into the establishment. His appearance frightened the guests and staff. One of the employees called the police. She reported that she did not dare to serve the troublemaker, but was also afraid to let him go in such a state. The 911 dispatcher sent patrol officers to the address, but before they could arrive, the waitress called back, even more frightened. According to her, when the drunk man got up, some things fell out of his pocket. Among them, the girl noticed a shotgun shell and a large bottle that looked like Tylenol. The visitor tried to escape, but the employee of the establishment managed to persuade him to wait. The cops did arrive and searched Randy's car. They found a shotgun in the cabin. Despite this, they did not detain Maidens. Witnesses say his wife came to pick him up. Interestingly, Randy asked the waitress several times not to call Rachel because she would be angry. He considered himself a victim of marital wrath, although it seems more likely that his wife had every reason to be offended by her husband. Of course, this is just an assumption. It's hard to judge someone else's marriage. But it appears Rachel knew well who she was dealing with. Be that as it may, a wealthy man who, drunk and armed, caused a disturbance in a public place was released by the police on his word of honor. They didn't even try to hold him accountable. They let him call his wife to take him home. Think about that. On April 21st, 2013, Rachel's mother, Betty Frisbee, called the Brentwood police. The woman asked law enforcement officers to urgently visit her daughter's home. She said her son-in-law was on the verge of suicide. According to other reports, Betty gave Randy an ultimatum. If he did not put Rachel on the phone within 10 minutes, she would call the cops. What exactly alarmed the woman is not known for certain, but it seems that Randy did call his mother-in-law after murdering his wife. It's terrifying to imagine what he must have said to Betty if she called the police. In any case, within a few minutes of Betty's call, patrol officers were already at the Maidens' mansion. No one answered the knocking at the door. The law enforcement officers noticed that all the curtains in the house were drawn, so it was impossible to look inside. Fortunately, the garage door turned out to be open. The officers were able to enter the house and began calling the owners by name. Neither Randy nor Rachel responded. Suddenly, the cops heard a child crying. On the second floor in a crib lay a tearful 2-year-old Natalie. One of the officers, Austin Kern, went upstairs and looked over the balcony railing into the great hall, and he saw blood splatters on the walls and a shotgun lying on the couch. Rachel's body was found on the first floor, in the hallway between the living room and the foyer leading to the master bedroom. The woman showed no signs of life. She was shot in the back. 8 bullets were fired from a 9mm pistol and 2 more from a shotgun. Inspection of the crime scene showed that someone had tried to wipe the blood from the walls and floor, and they even used bleach for this. Its smell was clearly felt. However, the terrible crimson streaks were still ominously visible. Randy was not in the house. An intensive search began for him, involving special forces and helicopters. That night, Brentwood's elite neighborhood resembled the set of a Hollywood action movie. Both the local police and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took up the case. Law enforcement officers immediately assumed that Randy might be armed, and given his strange behavior recently, extremely dangerous as well. At a press briefing, Brentwood Police Chief Jeff Hughes characterized Maidens as unstable. In the very first hours of the investigation, some important details came to light that shed light on what happened, and most importantly, indicated the possible motives of the killer. On the kitchen table of the mansion, police found a suicide note. In it, Randy verbosely apologized to his daughter. He assured her of his love, but admitted that he was forced to flee because of a terrible act, although he did not specify which one. The man thanked his wife's relatives for the years spent with them. At the same time, he complained about Rachel's impossible character. He claimed that he had not become her third husband for nothing, as the previous 2 had allegedly not endured it either. Randy wrote that for the last 6 years, he had endured daily humiliation from Rachel. She supposedly constantly yelled at him, quarreled over the smallest reason, and belittled him. And this last scandal was the last straw for him, but there was not a single word about suicide in the note. On the contrary, Randy expressed a desire to take his daughter and care for her in the future, albeit not without the help of Rachel's relatives. And one more telling fact. In the trunk of Randy's car, about $87,000 in cash were found. A solid sum of money was carelessly stuffed into a large bag. In addition, over $9,000 were found in the house. It seems that Randy planned to kill his wife and run away to start a new life. He had time to pack. At least a few hours had passed since the massacre of Rachel. Why then did he not leave? Because he could have escaped the pursuit. What prevented him? Telephone records showed that on the evening of the murder, Randy called his lawyer. It was one of Nashville's most experienced criminal law professionals, named David Rabin. What they talked about is not known for certain. However, a call to a lawyer in such a situation makes one wonder. Randy could have gone far. However, for some reason he decided to hide in the woods behind his house, perhaps due to haste or panic. And there he sat for 12 hours until he finally emerged from the green thicket with his hands up and surrendered to the police. Meanwhile, a thorough search of the elite neighborhood and interrogation of neighbors continued. Several residents reported that in the morning, after the murder, they noticed traces of attempts to break into their homes. Someone tried to open garage and regular doors, looking for shelter. The police checked the CCTV footage and confirmed it. It was Randy who was wandering around the neighborhood, knocking on neighbors' homes. What exactly he had in mind remained a mystery, but no one would dare to hide an unstable, potentially armed man who had just brutally murdered his wife. To put it mildly, the residents of the quarter were not happy about such a prospect. After his arrest, Randy was officially charged with first-degree murder, child neglect, and tampering with evidence. Under Tennessee law, he faced execution, or at least life imprisonment. Initially, the man was held in custody with a bail amount of $2.5 million. The suspect's lawyers immediately began to petition for a mitigation of the preventive measure. And they succeeded. In June 2013, the bail amount was reduced from $2.5 million to $750,000. Rabin convinced the judge that if Randy had really planned to escape, he would have done so long ago. After all, he had plenty of time to hide between the murder and the arrival of the police. But instead, he stayed to face justice. Moreover, no documents, tickets, or cards were found in his car that would indicate plans to leave the city. The new court decision allowed Randy to go free on bail. Where he lived and what he did before the trial, which was scheduled to begin in September 2014, is unknown. But Randy was unable to sit quietly all those months. In December 2013, he was arrested again for trespassing and knocking on apartment doors in a residential complex in Bellevue, another Nashville suburb. Avery Park, one of the apartment building residents, described the behavior of the uninvited guest as extremely strange. According to Park, Randy was posing as a police officer and demanding to be let in. The cops were called, and they found Randy completely drunk. But even despite this, even though he was out on bail awaiting trial on a first-degree murder charge, he was only charged with public intoxication, and the next day he was released on bail. This time, prosecutor Kim Helper managed to revoke Randy's right to bail due to violating its conditions. However, the situation itself says a lot about the attitude of the police and judges towards this man, and the threat he posed to society. Randy had repeatedly aroused suspicion even before murdering his wife. For example, neighbor Cynthia Rosenblum saw him wandering masked through the woods around the houses. She told reporters about this. According to Rosenblum and her husband, when they asked him what he was doing, Randy could barely speak. He was clearly intoxicated or under the influence of drugs. He explained his strange occupation by saying that he was supposedly walking the dogs and got lost. Before the murder in March, a case had already been opened against Randy for trespassing. This happened in Florida, but it was closed after his arrest on murder charges. No details were reported, although they could have shed light on the suspect's state of mind and motives. All these incidents testified to Randy's unbalanced behavior and propensity for violence. Despite this, until the tragedy with Rachel, there were no real consequences for the well-to-do man. 2 weeks before the start of the trial, scheduled for September 29, 2014, Randy Maiden suddenly made a deal with the prosecution. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder with a reduction in qualification and child neglect. In return, he received only 25 years in prison. Although for second-degree murder, the maximum punishment is 60 years behind bars. Under Tennessee law, Randy, as convicted of a serious violent crime, had to serve the entire term. But the deal allowed him to count on early release for exemplary behavior and taking into account the time already served at the time of sentencing. This was stated by the defendant's own lawyer. Thus, Randy, who was 42 at the time of sentencing. Rachel's relatives, her mother Betty Frisbee and brother Brent, were shocked by such a lenient sentence, and they issued a statement expressing their outrage. There are no words or actions that could change the pain, emptiness, and sorrow that our family feels because of the brutal murder of Rachel committed by Mr. Maidens. The pain and grief that this brutal murder brought was felt not only by her family members, but also by numerous friends, colleagues, and patients, the document says. This will have the greatest impact on the lives of Natalie, Brent, and Betty. They will live with this loss every day for the rest of their lives. The total number of years the family will live without Rachel is much longer than the term this man will serve for his terrible crime. The cowardly, brutal murder of Rachel, our beautiful, extraordinary sister, daughter, and mother, has left us with an emptiness that can never be filled, Rachel's relatives emphasized. The Williamson County District Attorney's Office stated that they agreed to the deal only for the sake of little Natalie, because they understand the trial could drag on and re-traumatize the child who lost both parents. But they did not hide that the sentence, in their opinion, was too lenient for such a brutal murder. Mr. Maiden's punishment is too light compared to the cruelty of the evil he committed himself. We would like to point out that our family would not have supported a plea agreement for this senseless and terrible murder of Rachel. We agreed with the prosecution's position solely for the sake of Natalie. Betty Frisbee summarized the family's stance. However, Randy was still allowed to speak. True, his defender David Rabin read out his client's appeal, and Randy began it with words to his mother-in-law. "Betty, right now my words sound so hollow in light of your tragic loss. You have to endure the worst pain a mother can feel, and I am the reason for it. Every morning I hope to wake up from this terrible nightmare that I myself brought upon our families. You accepted me into your family, and I destroyed it. I would exchange my life for Rachel's life to return your daughter to you, and Natalie's mother to her. I understand that this is impossible and will never be fair," he said, addressing Betty. But most of his words were an appeal to his 2-year-old daughter, who was left without a mother. "Natalie, my daughter, I can never express how sorry I am that I took your mom away from you. You lost both parents, and I am to blame for everything. Know that you were the most important person in your mother's life. Forgive me for hurting you both," Randy repented. He also asked for forgiveness from his wife's brother. "Brent, I'm so sorry you lost your sister. Your pain is unimaginable," Randy admitted. And he ended his penitential speech with an appeal to Rachel. "Rachel, I promised to love and protect you, but I betrayed you instead. I will live with this pain forever. The prison I've put myself in is the worst," he pathetically summed up. How sincere this repentance was is difficult to judge. Perhaps Randy really had an epiphany and repented of what he had done. Or maybe he was just trying to make an impression and reduce his sentence. Because up until his guilty plea, the man repeatedly shifted the blame onto Rachel. Even in his suicide note, he reproached her for her bad character, as if that could be a justification for his crime. Randy's deal with the prosecution also provided for the transfer to Natalie of all the property that the couple had acquired during their marriage. The girl's guardian, who survived that terrible night, became her grandmother, Betty Frisbee. So at least the orphan's financial future was secured. With this, the shocking story of the successful doctor's murder by her own husband came to an end. Randy Maidens officially admitted his guilt and found himself behind bars, albeit not for as long a term as justice demanded. Rachel's relatives were never able to recover from her tragic death, and they did not hide their disappointment with how the justice system works in their country. They say, even if it's about the massacre of a defenseless woman, a rich and influential man still gets preferences. This story is yet another proof that even in the most civilized, most democratic, and richest country in the world, the law is sometimes too lenient on murderers, especially if they have money, connections, and clever lawyers. But the main conclusion that should be drawn from the tragedy of the Maidens family lies in a different plane, and it applies to each of us. You never know what people are hiding behind the screen of well-being. Even those who live in huge houses in elite neighborhoods and outwardly have everything can suffer from alcoholism, drug addiction, domestic violence, and even resort to murder. Therefore, one should not believe the gloss and jump to premature conclusions. Traditionally, thank you for watching, and remind you that it would be great if you support the video by liking and subscribing to the channel. Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Crime Story Diaries. Today, we'll be examining a terrifying case, so I invite you to watch the video. Don't forget to leave your comments and likes. On November 3, 2006, what began as an ordinary autumn day in suburban Raleigh, the capital of North Carolina, would soon turn extraordinary. Birchleaf Drive, nestled in a quiet residential area, was typically a place where life unfolded peacefully and predictably. The houses, surrounded by well-maintained lawns and mature trees, exuded a sense of comfort and security. However, the neighborhood's peaceful atmosphere was shattered. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Meredith Fisher arrived at her sister Michelle Young's house. She entered through the garage, the door of which lifted easily by hand. Inside, Meredith immediately sensed that something was amiss. The house was unusually cold, and an ominous silence hung in the air. Upon ascending to the second floor, Meredith made a shocking discovery. Her sister Michelle lay motionless on the bedroom floor, surrounded by pools of blood. This horrific sight would forever change not only the lives of the Young family, but also the entire Raleigh community. Michelle Young, born Michelle Mary Fisher, came into the world on February 17, 1977, in Sayville, New York. From an early age, she exhibited traits that would later shape her personality: energy, determination, and optimism. As she grew up, Michelle dreamed of a career in finance, particularly aspiring to become a tax attorney. This dream would define her path for many years to come. In school, she excelled academically and was the captain of the cheerleading squad, demonstrating not only academic prowess, but also leadership qualities. Friends and family described Michelle as the all-American girl, cheerful, energetic, and full of enthusiasm. Her childhood was filled with ambitions and a drive for success, which later led her to enroll at North Carolina State University. After graduating from high school, Michelle enrolled at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, taking an important step towards her dream. Moving from the bustling New York to the relatively smaller Raleigh was a significant change in her life. However, Michelle quickly adapted, focusing on her studies in finance. Throughout her 4 years of college, Michelle demonstrated high work ethic and perseverance. Her efforts paid off. She earned a master's degree in accounting. This diploma opened up wide opportunities for her in the financial world. Soon after graduation, Michelle secured a job at a local accounting firm. This position not only provided her with financial stability, but also served as an excellent starting point for further career growth. Michelle quickly established herself as a competent and responsible employee. In February 2001, on the eve of her 24th birthday, Michelle decided to celebrate the occasion with friends at her favorite bar. It was there that a meeting occurred that would change her entire life. Jason Young, a graduate of the same university as Michelle, accidentally knocked over her glass of wine. This awkward moment became the beginning of their acquaintance. Jason apologized and bought Michelle a new drink, after which they struck up a conversation. It turned out they had a lot in common. Both had graduated from North Carolina State University and were passionate fans of the local football team, the Wolf Pack. Jason worked as a sales representative and was known for his charisma and self-confidence. Despite Jason's reputation as a ladies' man, his interest in Michelle seemed genuine. After this meeting, he began to visit Raleigh more frequently, using business trips as an excuse for dates with Michelle. Michelle and Jason's relationship developed rapidly. Despite Michelle's focus on her career and Jason's reputation as immature and impulsive, their feelings grew into a serious relationship. 2 years after they met, Michelle discovered she was pregnant. This news came as a surprise to both of them. Michelle, who had always dreamed of a traditional wedding, hadn't planned on having a child so early. Jason initially stated that he wasn't ready for either children or marriage. However, after a month of deliberation, the couple decided to get married. In August 2003, their wedding took place. Although the decision to marry was partly driven by practical considerations, particularly the need for medical insurance for Michelle, it also reflected their desire to start a family. On March 29, 2004, their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth Young, was born. Michelle fully devoted herself to motherhood, finding in it a new calling. Soon after Cassidy's birth, the Young family moved into a large house on Birchleaf Drive on the outskirts of Raleigh. It seemed like the embodiment of the American dream, a spacious home surrounded by greenery in a quiet neighborhood. However, it was here that the first signs of problems in their marriage began to surface. Michelle enjoyed her role as a mother and wife. Her sister Meredith moved to Raleigh to help with Cassidy's care. Michelle's relatives, especially her mother Linda, frequently visited the Young's house. However, these visits irritated Jason. Tension between Jason and Linda grew. Michelle talked to her mother on the phone daily, sharing details of her life, including problems in her relationship with her husband. This caused additional displeasure for Jason. The couple often argued, and these conflicts were no secret to friends and family. Jason had a hot temper, and Michelle increasingly complained to her mother about his behavior. Despite this, in the spring of 2006, Michelle shared joyful news with Jason. She was pregnant again. In the fall of 2006, when Michelle was 4 months pregnant, the young family's life seemed outwardly calm. However, hidden problems were growing beneath the surface. Jason, working as a sales representative, often went on business trips. Some of these trips, as it later turned out, had nothing to do with his work. In October, Jason went on a business trip to Florida. In reality, he was visiting an old friend named Michelle Money, with whom he had studied at university. They struck up a romance that quickly developed into a serious relationship. Over the next month, they exchanged almost 1,000 messages. Michelle was unaware of her husband's infidelity. She was focused on her pregnancy and caring for Cassidy. However, tension in the family was increasing. Conflicts between Jason and Michelle's mother, Linda, were becoming more frequent. Linda often stayed with them and even expressed a desire to move closer to her daughter, which caused Jason's displeasure. On the evening of November 2nd, 2006, Jason set out on another business trip to Clintwood, Virginia, where he had a business meeting scheduled for the morning of November 3rd. The distance to Clintwood was about 300 miles, so Jason decided to stop for the night at the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, approximately halfway. That evening, Michelle invited her friend Shelley over. The women spent time watching a TV show and talking. Michelle shared with her friend some problems in her relationship with Jason, particularly regarding holiday plans. Shelley left around 10 o'clock in the evening, feeling somewhat uncomfortable, as if someone was watching her. Jason checked into the hotel at 10:54 p.m. and entered his room at 10:56 p.m. According to the electronic key data, he did not leave the room again that night. However, the events that followed became the subject of intense investigation and court proceedings over the next few years. On November 3rd, 2006, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Meredith Fisher arrived at her sister's house. Jason had asked her to pick up some eBay printouts he had supposedly left in the home office. Entering through the unlocked garage, Meredith immediately felt that something was wrong. The house was unusually cold. In the kitchen, Meredith saw Michelle's purse and keys. Climbing to the second floor, she made a horrifying discovery. Michelle was lying face down on the bedroom floor, surrounded by pools of blood. The body was cold and stiff. Meredith immediately called emergency services. While talking to the operator, she noticed 2-year-old Cassidy crawling out from under the bed, dressed in clean pink pajamas. The child seemed confused but physically unharmed. Police quickly arrived at the scene. Investigators found that Michelle had suffered numerous blows to the head with a blunt object. An autopsy later confirmed that the cause of death was a traumatic brain injury. Michelle's body had numerous bruises, scratches, and fractures. She had lost several teeth, and a subarachnoid hemorrhage was found on her brain. Investigators immediately turned their attention to the victim's husband, Jason Young. This was standard procedure, as statistics showed that in about 60% of murder cases, victims knew their killers, and in spousal cases, the partner was always the first suspect. Jason claimed he was on a business trip in Virginia. According to his version, he left home on the evening of November 2nd, stopped for the night at the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, and set out for a business meeting in Clintwood on the morning of November 3rd. Hotel records confirmed that Jason checked in around 11 o'clock on the evening of November 2nd. The electronic key to his room was used only once to enter the room. This seemed to confirm his alibi. However, investigators uncovered several suspicious details. A hotel employee noticed that the emergency exit door on the first floor was propped open with a small red pebble at night. Moreover, the surveillance camera near these doors was disconnected at around 11:19 p.m. and remained inoperative until morning. During the investigation, unpleasant details of Jason Young's personal life came to light. Investigators discovered that he had several extramarital affairs. Particular attention was drawn to his relationship with Michelle Money, an old acquaintance of the Youngs from their college days. It was revealed that Jason and Michelle Money had exchanged nearly 1,000 messages during October 2006. On the day before the murder, they contacted each other 51 times. Moreover, Michelle Money was the last person Jason communicated with on November 2nd, and the first he called on the morning of November 3rd. Another woman, Carol Ann Sowerby, confessed to having an intimate relationship with Jason 10 days before Michelle's death. She recounted a strange incident where Jason removed her wedding ring and returned it only the next day. Michelle's friends and relatives also shared their observations. They spoke of frequent arguments between the couple, especially regarding visits from Michelle's mother, Linda. It became known that Jason was not happy about either Michelle's first or second pregnancy. At the crime scene, investigators faced a complex picture of evidence. In the bedroom where Michelle's body was found, 2 different shoe prints were discovered, size 10 and size 12 in the American system. Forensic experts carefully examined these prints, using special lighting and photographic techniques to enhance the visibility of the impressions. Thanks to the clear pattern on the soles, they were even able to determine the specific model of shoes. They were sneakers of a popular brand sold in many stores across the country. 2 small hairs were found on and near Michelle's body that didn't belong to either her or Jason. These hairs were carefully collected, packaged, and sent to the laboratory for DNA analysis. The results showed that the DNA from the hairs didn't match the profiles of anyone in Michelle's immediate circle. 4 DNA samples were found on the jewelry box that also didn't belong to the young couple. These findings raised many questions. Could they belong to the perpetrator, or were they traces left by guests long before the crime? Several unidentified fingerprints were found in various parts of the house. Experts compared them with the fingerprint database, but found no matches. This could mean that the criminal had no prior convictions, or that these prints belonged to one of the house visitors. Jason's computer drew special attention from investigators. When analyzing the search history, they found suspicious queries such as anatomy of a knockout, loss of consciousness from traumatic brain injury, and similar topics. Digital forensics experts tried to establish the exact time of these searches, but faced technical difficulties. It remained unclear whether these searches were related to the crime or had another explanation. Investigators also noted the absence of Michelle's wedding and engagement rings. They thoroughly searched the house, but didn't find these valuable items. At the same time, other jewelry and money remained untouched, ruling out the version of a common robbery. This detail seemed particularly important, considering the testimony about Jason previously removing a ring from his mistress's finger. Forensic experts conducted a detailed analysis of the blood spatter pattern on the walls and furniture in the bedroom. They used special techniques to reconstruct the trajectory of the blows and the attacker's position. This data helped create an approximate picture of how the attack occurred, but didn't give a definitive answer about the perpetrator's identity. Despite a significant amount of physical evidence, the investigation failed to find anything that directly linked Jason to the murder. No traces of Michelle's blood were found in his car, on his clothes, or in his hotel room. Jason's fingerprints in the house were expected and contained no traces of blood. Experts also analyzed surveillance camera recordings on the route between the hotel where Jason stayed and the Youngs' house. They tried to find confirmation of his alibi, or conversely, evidence of his return home on the night of the murder. However, due to the limited number of cameras on the highway and the low quality of night recordings, these searches didn't yield conclusive results. Such a complex and ambiguous picture of evidence created serious difficulties for the investigation. On one hand, there were many suspicious circumstances pointing to Jason's possible involvement in the crime. On the other hand, the lack of direct evidence of his guilt left room for doubt. This situation posed a challenging task for the prosecution: how to convince the jury of the suspect's guilt, relying primarily on circumstantial evidence. Despite the lack of direct evidence, investigators continued to focus their attention on Jason Young. For 3 years after the murder, law enforcement meticulously gathered and analyzed all possible evidence. On December 14, 2009, 3 years after Michelle's death, Jason Young was finally arrested on charges of first-degree murder. This decision was based on a combination of circumstantial evidence and suspicious circumstances. Preparation for the trial lasted almost 2 more years. During this time, the prosecution tried to build a compelling case against Jason, relying on available evidence and testimonies. The first trial of Jason Young began in June 2011. The prosecution presented a theory according to which Jason had planned his wife's murder due to financial difficulties and a desire to leave the marriage. The prosecution argued that after checking into the Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia, Jason secretly left the hotel at night, returned to Raleigh, committed the murder, and then returned. They argued that he interfered with the hotel's surveillance cameras and made a stop at a gas station between Hillsville and Raleigh. The testimony of a gas station employee became a key element of the prosecution. She claimed that around 5 o'clock in the morning on November 3rd, a man in a white SUV stopped at the farthest pump. After an argument about payment, he threw $20, filled up for $15, and left without taking the change. The woman identified Jason in a photograph. The defense insisted on the absence of direct evidence of Jason's guilt. They argued that it was physically impossible to make such a journey, commit murder, and return unnoticed in such a short period of time. After lengthy deliberations, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. The judge was forced to declare a mistrial. No verdict was reached, which meant the need for a new trial. Parallel to the criminal process, Michelle Young's family filed a civil lawsuit against Jason. Unlike criminal court, where evidence beyond reasonable doubt is required, civil cases demand less stringent standards of proof. Jason completely ignored this lawsuit, refusing to participate in the process. This decision played against him. After reviewing the available evidence, the judge concluded that Jason was indeed responsible for Michelle's death. As a result of the civil process, Jason was ordered to pay $15.5 million to the deceased's family. Although this decision had no direct impact on the criminal case, it significantly influenced public opinion and created additional pressure on Jason. After the unsuccessful attempt to reach a verdict in the first trial, the prosecution got an opportunity to review their strategy and prepare for a retrial. The second trial of Jason Young began in February 2012, almost 5.5 years after Michelle's murder. This time, the prosecution approached the case with new tactics. Firstly, they managed to obtain the court's permission to use the results of the civil lawsuit against Jason as an argument in favor of his guilt. Although this decision sparked controversy among lawyers, the judge deemed it admissible, arguing that the jury had the right to know about all relevant circumstances of the case. Moreover, during the preparation for the new trial, investigators uncovered new information that could be crucial to the case. It was discovered that a year before the murder, Jason had purchased shoes with the same sole pattern as the bloody footprint found in Michelle's room. These shoes were never found, which raised suspicions among investigators. Prosecutors presented this fact as evidence that Jason might have disposed of potential evidence. Prosecutors also focused on building a more detailed psychological profile of Jason. They brought in a behavioral analysis expert who studied Jason's relationship history, his behavior before and after the murder, and presented his findings to the court. This expertise aimed to show that Jason had a predisposition to violent behavior and deception. An important element of the new prosecution strategy was the involvement of additional witnesses. Jason's former fiancée, Genevieve Cargol, agreed to testify. She spoke about instances of domestic violence by Jason, particularly an incident at a wedding in Texas where a drunk Jason forcibly removed her ring during an argument. This testimony was intended to demonstrate to the jury that Jason was capable of aggressive actions towards those close to him. Prosecutors also paid more attention to analyzing phone calls and messages between Jason and his mistress, Michelle Money. They presented a detailed chronology of their communication in the days before and after the murder, trying to show that Jason had a motive to get rid of his wife for the sake of a new relationship. Digital forensics experts conducted additional analysis of Jason's computer, attempting to establish the exact time of suspicious search queries. Although they couldn't obtain definitive results, they were able to narrow down the time frame in which these searches were made, strengthening suspicions about their connection to the crime. Jason's defense, in turn, prepared counter-arguments for each point of the prosecution. They insisted that all evidence against their client was circumstantial and could have alternative explanations. Jason's lawyers also tried to discredit his former fiancée's testimony, claiming she might have personal motives for providing negative characterizations. Preparation for the second trial was intensive and comprehensive. Both sides understood that this might be the last chance to resolve the case in court. The prosecution was determined to achieve a conviction, while the defense sought to prove Jason's innocence, or at least sow enough doubt in the minds of the jurors. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The public and media closely followed every step of the process, understanding its importance not only for Michelle's and Jason's families, but also for the entire justice system. This trial was to be decisive in the long and complex case of Michelle Young's murder. The second trial lasted several weeks. The jurors carefully listened to all evidence and testimonies. Unlike the first trial, this time they managed to reach a unanimous decision. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jason Young guilty of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Reaction to the verdict was mixed. Michelle's family and friends felt relief, believing that justice had finally prevailed. However, some observers expressed doubts about the sufficiency of evidence for such a severe sentence. After the verdict was announced, Jason Young's lawyers immediately began working on an appeal. They argued that the trial court had made several errors that affected the fairness of the process. One of the main arguments of the defense was that the judge allowed the jury to learn about the results of the civil lawsuit against Jason. The lawyers believed that this information could have unfairly influenced the jury's decision. The Court of Appeals agreed with the defense's arguments and overturned the verdict, ordering a new trial. However, before a third trial could begin, the state Supreme Court reviewed this decision and upheld the original verdict. Meanwhile, little Cassidy, who lost her mother and effectively her father, was being raised by her Aunt Meredith and other relatives of Michelle. The family tried to provide the girl with a normal childhood despite the tragic circumstances. The case of Michelle Young left a deep mark on the Raleigh community and beyond. It drew attention to issues of domestic violence and the complexities of investigating crimes without direct evidence. Many in Raleigh still remember Michelle as a vibrant young woman, a devoted mother, and a successful professional. Her tragic death became a reminder of vulnerability, even in seemingly safe suburbs. The case also sparked discussions in legal circles about the role of circumstantial evidence in criminal trials. Some experts believed that Jason's verdict was fair, considering the totality of circumstances. Others expressed concern about establishing guilt based primarily on circumstantial evidence. Michelle's family continued to fight to preserve her memory. They established the Michelle Young Foundation, which provides support to victims of domestic violence and their children. Cassidy, Michelle, and Jason's daughter, grew up under the care of her mother's family. They made every effort to ensure she had a normal childhood, protecting her from excessive media attention to the tragic story of her parents. The case of Michelle Young remains a subject of interest for criminologists and law students. It is often used as an example of the complexity of investigation and prosecution in cases without direct evidence. Despite the verdict, some questions remained unanswered. The identity of the woman allegedly seen in Jason's car on the night of the murder was never established. This gave rise to theories about the possible involvement of other persons in the crime, although the prosecution never officially considered this version. This case also drew attention to the importance of technical evidence in modern criminal investigations. Surveillance camera footage, electronic key data, and computer information became key elements in constructing the picture of the crime. Over the years since the verdict, Jason's supporters continued to insist on his innocence. They created websites and support groups, claiming he had become a victim of a miscarriage of justice. However, for most Raleigh residents, the case of Michelle Young remains a tragic reminder of how quickly a seemingly perfect life can be shattered. It forced many to rethink their relationships and be more attentive to signs of problems in the families of friends and neighbors. Traditionally, thank you for watching and remind you that it would be great if you support the video by liking and subscribing to the channel.